Hey everybody, it's been a while. I've been busy working on some projects offline and dealing with some health stuff this past year. But this video is going to be a bit different than my previous videos. This was a presentation I did for a local organization's lifelong learning program back in April. It was originally a live Zoom event, and the recording was supposed to be posted to their YouTube channel afterward. Unfortunately, the organization ended up being unable to post my video because of Trump's executive order about federally funded programs and the promotion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I wish I was joking, but I am not. If you're interested in hearing that story, please click the link in the description to watch my recent Instagram video. The organization was very apologetic, but they obviously had no choice but to comply or risk their grant being terminated. And they did send me the recording so I could at least post it here, but first they had to remove their segments, so you'll probably notice it's a bit chopped up and awkward. I still wanted to share it though because I worked really hard on putting this together, and I'm hopeful that it will still be helpful for someone out there. So please enjoy my presentation on learning how to explore the outdoors with chronic illness and disabilities. So my name is Amy Denton-Luke. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the creator of Disabled in the Wild, an Instagram account, YouTube channel, and blog where I talk about exploring the outdoors with chronic illness and disabilities. My primary goal is to help encourage other people with disabilities and illnesses to find ways of enjoying the outdoors within their own abilities and interests. And I also enjoy helping non-disabled folks challenge their assumptions and learn what it means to be disabled. I do a variety of content creation. On Instagram, I like to share pictures, personal experiences, and short stories. I am a writer, so I prefer writing long-form content, so I created the blog to explain my thoughts in detail and my lived experience more thoroughly. For example, the challenges and privileges of my disability experience. I also took on the project of writing accessibility reviews for Missoula's nearby outdoor spaces after being inspired by Cyrenaica for disabled hikers. On YouTube, I turned some of my blog posts into video format. For example, tips for exploring the outdoors and my must-have list for outdoor adventures. I've also made a few adventure videos to show others how I like to explore the outdoors and how I do it with my disabilities. Through my work with Disabled in the Wild, I've been fortunate enough to get invited to give a guest lecture at the University of Maryland. I was featured in 2 local magazines last year, and I created a video for an event for Explore Austin, all of which were focused on accessibility in the outdoors. So this is a topic that I not only love sharing with others, but it's one that I think a lot of folks are taking interest in, which is awesome. So tonight, I will first share a bit about my background, my story, and how I explore the outdoors with my own disabilities and illnesses. Then I'll give some examples of my work and share details from a few of my favorite projects. Then I'll touch on some big picture stuff with myths and misconceptions about disabilities and the messages that I don't want to give. And finally, ending with the goals and takeaways that I do want to share with others. And I will also be pausing for questions between the first couple of sections and then again at the end. So feel free to ask questions as we go. So I've always had a deep love for the outdoors. I actually grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, but I lived for fishing trips to the nearby forest preserve and exploring the woods with my cousins in Wisconsin. I loved anything that got me outdoors, and I was also really interested in rocks and fossils. I had a rock tumbler and a little rock collection. My grandfather was a rockhound, so he would encourage my interest by giving me a few of his rocks every time we went to visit him. I was 12 years old when I decided I wanted to go to MSU Bozeman for college, and I could not wait to live in the mountains. I made that dream come true when I moved to Bozeman in 2007 and graduated with my bachelor's degree in anthropology in 2011. After graduation, I took some time off of school to work, but I still wanted to maintain some closeness to my interests. So I volunteered at the Museum of the Rockies, cataloging a collection of stone tools, and that's also when I went rockhounding for the very first time. One of my favorite rocks gifted to me by my grandfather was this big Montana agate from the Yellowstone River, or so I thought, and I was determined to find one myself. And I did. After a few trips out, I found my first big Montana agate just east of Billings. And then I found out that this is actually a Brazil agate that I had accidentally mislabeled. But after that first big find, it quickly became my obsession. I started taking more and more rock hounding trips each year, not just to the Yellowstone River, but all over Montana and even into Idaho and South Dakota. I searched for all kinds of rocks, mostly agates, but also petrified wood, jasper, crystals, sunstones, fossils, sapphires. Every year I got better at rock hounding, and every year my collection and my obsession grew. My collection now weighs 2,280 pounds. I have an entire room in my house dedicated to rocks, plus a few dozen totes stacked in the garage. I love rocks so much, I even started hand embroidering Fairburn agates, and I'm hoping to set up my lapidary shed this year and start learning how to cut and polish them using my grandfather and great uncle's lapidary equipment. And almost my entire 2,280-pound rock collection was self-collected while I was both chronically ill and disabled. So I've not been disabled my whole life, but I've had health issues since birth. Those health issues became much more debilitating at 17 years old. And over the following 5 years, throughout my time in undergrad, I had 5 laparoscopies and 2 angioplasties for median arcuate ligament syndrome and endometriosis. After my last surgery in 2011, I had a few decent low symptom years. Both illnesses were under control and fairly well managed, and I started to feel more confident in my health, which is when I decided I was ready to go to grad school for archaeology. I was accepted into U of M Missoula, where I planned to study lithics, aka stone tools. We moved to Missoula. I was happily looking forward to this next chapter, and then I got sick again. And it got really bad really fast. I went from being able to work 2 jobs 6 days a week, plus rock hounding, volunteering, spending time with friends, to being unable to eat or sleep, having severe joint, muscle, and nerve pain 24/7, chronic fatigue, brain fog, and cognitive dysfunction, difficulty focusing, reading, and retaining new information, confusion and disorientation, clawing in my hands and difficulty with gripping, swollen lymph nodes, migraines, vertigo, numbness and tingling, and more, all within just a few months. And then one Friday afternoon in September of 2015, the right side of my body went numb and tingly. I noticed my right leg was struggling to keep up with me, and within a week I was using a cane. I was initially quite determined to stay in school. I even did a month-long field dig in Canada when I was very, very ill and had no business being there. But despite my best efforts and the support of my wonderful advisor, Dr. Anna Prentice, I had no choice but to drop out in 2016. I was eventually diagnosed with chronic inflammatory response syndrome. It's not a well-known illness yet, but basically CIRS is caused by a genetic susceptibility and exposure to certain biotoxins. Genes load the gun and exposure pulls the trigger, as they say. Symptom-wise, it mimics MS, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, and others. Aside from a recent relapse, most of my symptoms have disappeared or improved with treatment. And these days, my symptoms are primarily chronic pain, fatigue, and cognitive dysfunction, as well as the mobility issues. But 10 years ago, things were still very much in the getting worse phase, especially in my legs. While a cane was enough for me initially, as my condition and my legs grew progressively worse, my body really needed more support. This was especially evident when I would attempt to go rockhounding. Even though I was very sick, my desire to be outdoors never wavered. It was my happy place and the thing that kept me going throughout my illness and my treatment. At the time, I could only be outdoors for an hour, maybe two, before becoming too sick and in too much pain. And my legs would get so bad that I could barely walk at all. I would be inching my way back to the truck, just sobbing from the pain. The cane just wasn't enough anymore, and I either needed more support or to never leave the couch again. So in August of 2017, I bought forearm crutches, and on my 28th birthday, I went for my very first walk with them, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. I was suddenly able to walk so much farther and faster and with so much less pain. It was such a relief after struggling so long with the cane, and I was kicking myself for not switching sooner. The biggest things the crutches help me with are fatiguing weakness, which means the farther I walk, the weaker my leg muscles become and the less function and control I have, especially in my right leg. So I can walk a short distance unassisted, but after a couple of 100 feet, my legs just kind of stop working right. The crutches also help with my chronic nerve and muscle pain by taking pressure and weight off of my legs, which makes it less painful both during and after using my legs, with shorter and more mild flare-ups after. The crutches also gave me stability, confidence, endurance, less recovery time, freedom. I felt like I could do anything. That first walk with forearm crutches was life-changing, and it gave me a lot of hope. But I still wondered if it was even possible for someone like me to explore the outdoors, because while the crutches were very helpful, my support needs don't begin and end there. I still had a lot to worry about. What if I walked too far? What if my pain level became overwhelming? What if I got hit by fatigue or dizziness? What if I got confused? I needed to know that outdoor recreation was still possible for me, and I really needed to see someone with my disabilities exploring the outdoors. That's when I started searching online for encouragement and hope. I found one video on YouTube of a man walking through the woods with forearm crutches, and I found a couple of pictures on Instagram of a forearm crutch user hiking with a group called Resilient Squad, founded by Edgar and Rosie Rodriguez. And it was not long after when Saira Nagakiri founded Disabled Hikers. All of these people gave me the courage and the permission to try to explore the outdoors and figure out what works best for me. Through a lot of trial, error, and flare-ups, I've learned a lot about what works for me in the outdoors, and obviously what works for me won't work for everyone. We all have different needs, different interests, different abilities. I think it's worth acknowledging that I still have a fair amount of mobility. I'm still able to do my favorite pastime to some extent. I have access to public lands, a partner willing to join me on adventures, money and equipment to be able to do these things. And I think that makes a big difference. So everyone's journey will be different. But learning how to explore the outdoors with my own illnesses and disabilities didn't happen for me overnight. It's a process that takes time. And I think that process starts with grief. When you become disabled later in life, you have to go through this period of grief and acceptance, which can take years. You have to let go of the way you used to do things and adjust to this new life and your new limitations. Once upon a time, I could leave my house at the crack of dawn, drive 3 hours to a rock hounding spot, spend all day collecting rocks, and then at dusk drive 3 hours home and still go to work the next day. I definitely can't do that anymore. And I had to learn how to settle for much, much less in terms of where I can go, how much I can do in a day, and how it affects me afterward. I've also learned that I'm not a hiker. That much has become quite obvious to me. It currently takes me about an hour to walk a mile, sometimes more depending on the terrain. And I can only walk about 2 miles in a day total. If I need to, I can walk a little farther and a little faster, but it's just too difficult and painful, and I don't enjoy the pressure of having to do persistent forward movement, especially with a single destination in mind that I may or may not be able to reach. So hiking for the sake of hiking is just not a good fit for my abilities. However, I have learned that rockhounding is the perfect fit for my abilities, which is what I'd rather be doing anyway. Most of the rockhounding I do involves wandering around on wide open BLM land, and I'm usually only about half mile from the truck and the road, which means I'm also not far from help if I need it. I not only don't have to go far, but I also don't have to go fast. I can take my time getting to my rockhounding spot and then wander around slowly at my own pace. And in fact, when you're doing surface collection, rockhounding, you're already naturally moving slowly because you're carefully scanning the ground for rocks. And if you go too quickly, you might miss what you're looking for. So it's better for me to move slowly anyway. When you're chronically ill, you have to push through symptoms at some point or you'll never do anything at all. But there's a difference between pushing slightly outside of your symptom tolerance and completely destroying your body. It took me a long time to unlearn that tendency to ignore my body's needs and push myself way too hard. And this is one that I still struggle with a lot. I'm learning how to let my body lead the way rather than my own stubborn determination. It's much more valuable to me now to take good care of my body, listen to what it needs, and go at whatever pace my body wants. So I've learned how to take breaks as well, as often and as lengthy as I need to. It helps me to manage symptoms like pain and fatiguing weakness a lot better, which means I can enjoy my time outside more and possibly spend more time outside as a result. I carry a couple different lightweight portable chairs with me, but sometimes sitting isn't enough and I really need to lie down. The fatigue, dizziness, or muscle weakness can overwhelm me quite suddenly. So I've learned to lie down and sometimes take a 2-hour nap on the riverbed until I'm feeling well enough to either walk back to the truck or just continue on with my day. So those of you who are chronically ill know that anytime we leave the house, we have to bring a lot of stuff. And this is especially true when you're outdoors and you don't have the legs to be making more than one trip to and from the truck. So I've learned to pack my backpack so that I have everything I could possibly need for the entire day. I always carry 2 lunches, snacks, 2 bottles of water, Gatorade, medications, extra clothes, a portable chair, and more. But I can carry a surprising amount of weight on my back, which is what happens after many years of rockhounding. There are positives and benefits to being a disabled rockhound. As a forearm crutch user, I have a built-in advantage. I automatically have 4 points of contact while crossing rivers, and I always have trekking poles for going uphill and downhill. I've also learned that I'm actually at my most capable on steep hillsides and wading through rivers, which might be surprising to some folks. But my whole life involves steadying my muscles and finding balance and strength where it feels like there is none, as well as paying very close attention to my body. So it comes quite naturally to me, that slow, sustained muscle engagement and hyper-awareness of my body is much easier for me than the hurried and relentless forward movement of hiking. And ultimately, each day is going to be different. There are days when my body will cooperate and I'll have a great time. There are days when my symptoms are higher and my body needs more support, but it's still an overall enjoyable day. And then there are days when it doesn't matter what I do, how much I prepare, how slow I go, or how much I rest. Sometimes my symptoms will be unbearable and it's just going to be a crappy day outdoors. That's just life with chronic illness. Before I became disabled, I remember trying to hike with a few different groups back in college, and I could never keep up with them. I was very slow. I needed a lot of breaks. The people I went hiking with were not always the most patient and would sometimes leave me behind. I was always getting pressured to push myself beyond my limits, to go faster than I could go, to skip taking breaks, to catch up and keep up, and it made me feel like crap. While I did enjoy hiking, I hated that there was always this expectation to do it quickly, to rush through it, to get to the top, to conquer the mountain, spend 5 whole minutes enjoying the view, and then race back down the trail. That experience has had a major impact in how I view outdoor recreation even today. And perhaps my most favorite lesson that I've learned is that I don't have to approach the outdoors that way anymore. Being disabled has given me a new outlook on exploring the outdoors. It's a much slower, more intimate and grounded approach to the outdoors, and I've grown to appreciate this new way of being in nature. I love that I can let my body lead the way. I'm not as anxious about what symptoms may arise. I feel safe and at home resting in nature and tending to my body as needed, and I can more fully enjoy where I am in the moment. I have no interest in fighting my body or conquering a mountain or being an athlete or even doing adaptive sports, to be honest. I just want to sit next to the river. I want to drive to the grasslands and wander around for a little while. I want to be gentle and go slow, to lean into what my body needs and explore at my own pace and within my own abilities. I want my body to be enough as it is, and I want other disabled people to know that that's an option too. There's a time when it was so important for me to see examples of other disabled people exploring the outdoors. I needed to know that it was still possible for me. I was grateful for the few examples that I had, but I remember wishing there had been more. And that's when I realized that I could be that person for others. I could help show people what's possible. So in January of 2022, I created Disabled in the Wild and started sharing the kind of content that I needed to see when I was younger. And I knew exactly what it meant to the person on the other side watching it. So now I will share a few examples of my favorite Disabled in the Wild projects, starting with tips for exploring the outdoors with chronic illnesses and disabilities. Tip number 1, preparation and planning. Before I go anywhere, I try to gather as much information about a place as I can from reviews, maps, and various websites so I can plan my trip accordingly. For example, if people are commenting that the road to the trailhead is super bumpy, then I'll know to bring nausea medication. Or if I'm going to a park with a walking trail but no benches, then I'll bring my portable stool. It's also a good idea to have a backup plan so that if you drive hours to a location and for some reason it's closed or not currently accessible due to snow or flooding or construction, you already have a plan in mind for somewhere else to go. This saves you from having to find a different spot to visit while fighting through brain fog or simply going home and causing a flare-up over nothing. I'd also recommend having all the information you need about the site available offline, including offline maps, notes, or screenshots of the information, so it's all in one place. You don't have to try to remember what you read or find it again when you might not have cell service. Tip number 2, you do not have to conquer a mountain. It can be really difficult for people who became disabled later in life to accept that they can no longer do what they used to do. And for some people, this will stop them from pursuing outdoor recreation altogether. When we return to the outdoors with our new limitations, we often have the same expectations of our bodies that we did before becoming sick or disabled, and we make comparisons with how we used to do things, and that makes the adjustment even more difficult. It's really important to first take that time to process your grief, and then when you're ready, try to start over. Meet your body where it is right now. Get to know this new you and your new body, learn a new way of interacting with nature and existing in the outdoors. Be open to trying new activities or trying your old activities in new ways. In addition to letting go of past expectations, we also need to unlearn how we've been conditioned to approach the outdoors. It doesn't have to be a 10-mile hike or nothing. It's possible to enjoy the outdoors without conquering a mountain or getting an adrenaline rush. The idea that we have to go quickly and show off our strength and power and conquer is very much part of our capitalist colonist worldview, but it doesn't have to be. We don't have to rush through it, conquer it, show off, or be in competition with others. We can just be there to enjoy it. Spending time in nature can look however you want it to look. It can be simple things like practicing nature photography at a park, bird watching at a wildlife refuge, or sitting in your backyard. It's okay to slow down, be gentle with your body, and just enjoy being in nature. Tip number 3, use the mobility aid. A lot of folks really struggle to start using mobility aids. They may feel embarrassed, self-conscious, or think their condition isn't bad enough, but you do not have to have a total loss in function in order to justify using a mobility aid. If you think a cane or rollator or trekking poles can help you reduce symptoms like pain or fatigue, or increase stability, balance, endurance, or confidence, and that's all it takes to get you outside and enjoying the outdoors, then it's worth it. Increasing your quality of life is a completely valid reason to use one. I wish people knew that mobility aids are not a negative thing. Using an aid is not somehow giving up on yourself or giving in to disability. Mobility aids exist to support our bodies the way they need to be supported and help us continue living our lives the way we want to live. Mobility aids can make it possible to go to certain places or do certain activities, and that's why so many people view their aids as freedom. I, for one, couldn't do any of the things I do outdoors or indoors if it wasn't for my crutches. They are a wonderful, positive addition to my life. Tip number 4, rest and take breaks. So taking breaks periodically, for example, sitting down to rest for 5 to 10 minutes every hour, can really help manage symptoms to make it a more enjoyable day, and maybe even make it an easier recovery in the day afterward too. The great thing about taking breaks is that it gives you time to really take in the view, enjoy the scenery, and truly experience a place rather than just passing through. I'll never forget the first time I talked about taking breaks on Instagram. Someone commented that she struggled with feeling symptoms coming on as she was hiking, and it would scare her so much that she would rush off the trail and back to the car as fast as she could before the symptoms could get worse. And it had never occurred to her to just sit down on the trail, rest, and pace herself. Rest is something that a lot of us struggle with, myself included. So many chronically ill people are ambitious overachievers who don't know how to rest or quit. And it doesn't help that we live in a world that tells us to ignore our bodies and push through symptoms at any and all costs, as if hurting your body for the sake of doing the thing is somehow worthy of celebration and praise. In my opinion, the hard part is not necessarily pushing through or trying to do more. The hard part is slowing down, taking breaks, and listening to what our bodies need. Pushing through is not the only strength we can carry. Listening and supporting, gentleness and softness, resting and pacing are all strengths too. The reason we spend time outdoors is to connect with nature, to enjoy the views and sounds, be in the moment, and admire the beautiful world we live in. When we recognize that simply enjoying the outdoors is the goal, it's easier to let our bodies lead the way, to be mindful of our symptoms and know when our bodies need tending to, when it's time to rest, and when it's time to go home. Because if the goal is to enjoy ourselves outdoors, then we must also enjoy, or at least tolerate, being in our bodies while we're out there. And lastly, recovery. It's pretty common for people with chronic illnesses to have flare-ups after doing pretty much anything. So I think it's important to go into the trip planning for the inevitable flare-up after, rather than hoping it won't happen. Just expect it, be prepared to take some time to let your body heal, and plan for a few days of rest and recovery. Chores and to-do lists can wait. Just be extra gentle with your body and take good care of you. So our adventures may look different than they used to, but if we do a little extra planning and recovery, choose the right activities and adaptive equipment, and take it easy on our bodies, we can still enjoy being in nature. Next up is my must-have list for outdoor adventures. Everyone's must-haves will be different, of course. It really depends on the location you're in, the terrain, what activities you're doing, plus your particular illnesses, disabilities, and abilities. So I'll give a few quick examples of the special features and requirements that I have to think about when choosing outdoor gear, and maybe it will help get you thinking about your own list. So I have two lightweight, compact, portable chairs that I bring depending on what activity I'm doing. One chair for longer breaks in one spot and a stool for quick breaks while I'm walking. They're both quick and easy to set up and put away. My backpack has to be large enough to fit not only all of my gear for the entire day, but also 25 pounds of rocks. Plus, as a forearm crutch user, my backpack needs to be narrow, so I'm not bashing my elbows into the pack as I'm walking. My boots need to be super lightweight and non-bulky so I don't trip over my own feet. The crutches I use are specifically designed for hikers. Yes, they make forearm crutches for hikers. They're called side sticks. They're lightweight with ergonomic grips and good shocks that are located higher up on the crutch so they don't get clogged with dirt or rocks. Because I use my crutches for weight bearing, I wear padded gloves to protect my hands. Otherwise, you can rip your skin off when walking long distances. Ask me how I know. As a rockhound, my hands are constantly filthy and covered in dirt, algae, and probably cow poop. So I bring wipes and hand sanitizer to clean my hands before eating and taking medications. My doctor says I'm not allowed to get any more bug bites, so I have to bring lots of bug spray and a tick bite kit, basic survival gear in case I get stranded somewhere because I've run out of legs again. And lastly, a pro tip for anyone with a vulva and an overactive bladder especially. If you don't like packing out used toilet paper, but you also know drip drying isn't quite enough, you can wear a small cotton pad to absorb any excess moisture after squatting in the bushes. If you're interested in hearing my entire list of must-have outdoor gear, you can find it on my YouTube channel or on my blog. And while you're on my website, you can head over to the reviews tab to check out my reviews. So I really wanted to do something that helped my local disabled community. So one of the biggest projects I took on was writing reviews for outdoor spaces near the Missoula area, including state parks, historic sites, and wildlife refuges. I reviewed 23 outdoor spaces total, which included detailed accessibility information, site descriptions, and photos of the paths, facilities, and views. I was inspired to do this project by Siren Nagakiri's work for disabled hikers. Siren started writing detailed hiking trail descriptions back in 2018 after finding out the hard way that a lot of hiking trail guides just didn't have the information they needed to determine if a trail was within their ability to hike safely. So they started by sharing that information on their website and eventually published their first book for Washington and Oregon, and then one for Northern California. I remember wishing there had been something like that available when I first moved to Missoula in 2015. I had a hard time figuring out where to go when I first got here because I was not only new to the area, but I was also newly disabled and still learning how to navigate that. When I did find a place I wanted to try to visit, similar to Siren, I often had a hard time finding the information online that I needed to decide if a site was going to be accessible for me, as well as worth the flare-up afterward. And I too had to learn the hard way that sometimes the information I found was not totally accurate. Before we went anywhere, it would have been helpful to know things like, how long is the walk? What is the path like? Are there actually benches? Does it have a pretty view? And I realized the information that would have helped me in 2015 also would be helpful for others in 2022. So I went out to collect that information to share with others. You can find those reviews on my website or on Google Reviews. I also have a blog post called Why I'm Writing Reviews for Local Outdoor Spaces, if you'd like to read more about some of the accessibility issues that I ran into. But next, let's talk about what accessibility in the outdoors even means. Accessibility in the outdoors is something that has probably come up the most through my work. I think people are becoming more aware of inclusivity and equity, and they want to know what that means and what it looks like for outdoor recreation. Usually when I say the words accessibility in the outdoors, people think about a wheelchair user and a paved path, and that's pretty much it. But just like disabled doesn't solely mean wheelchair user, accessibility doesn't solely or necessarily mean a paved path. So I wanted to go over a few disability basics. Disability just means that a person struggles with one or more daily functions. There are many types of disabilities that affect different parts of the body and different daily functions with varying degrees, shades of gray, strengths and weaknesses, good days and bad. Disability is not solely people who use mobility aids. And in fact, about 80 to 90% of disabled people do not have a visible or apparent disability, meaning that for the majority of disabled people, you can't tell they're disabled just by looking at them. Let's see, for example, some folks are deaf or blind, have heart or respiratory conditions, or neurological, musculoskeletal, and autoimmune disorders. So the term disabled covers a lot of people with a big range of support needs. Each disability and every disabled person is different, so their access needs are going to be different as well. Because accessibility means different things to people with different disabilities, we can't simply say an outdoor space is 100% accessible or 100% inaccessible, because there's too much complexity and nuance for us to make that determination for other people. That's why it's important for a variety of accessibility information to be available, so each person can decide for themselves if a site is accessible to them. So what are some examples of accessibility in the outdoors? For parking, is there accessible parking, and is there van accessible parking? Keep in mind, some people require that extra protected space to get in and out of their vehicle. Also, is there a ramp and a clear pathway from the parking lot to the entrance? For restrooms, are they ADA accessible? Are there steps and stairs to get to the bathroom? Are there restrooms farther into the site or just at the parking lot? That can make a big difference for folks with bladder and bowel conditions. For pathways, what is the material of the path? It does not have to be paved for it to be accessible, just a firm, mostly flat surface. And in fact, paved paths don't work for every disabled person. Myself, for example, I suffer from severe nerve pain in my legs, so concrete and asphalt are actually more painful and difficult for me to walk on. My preference would be something like finely crushed gravel, which is also wheelchair friendly and blends pretty well with nature. Other types of path material include chunky gravel, boardwalks, and natural dirt paths, and more. Next, how wide are the paths? Are there bumps and holes, or is it fairly even? Are there obstacles like tree roots and rocks, rough transitions, or other tripping hazards? Lifting your feet can be very difficult and physically tiring for some folks, so having a lot of obstacles can actually change the difficulty level of the trail for them. Next, are there steps and stairs? Are there steep hills? How far is the walk from the parking lot to the point of interest? Next, are there benches? How many benches and how far apart are they? Do the benches have back support? This would be very helpful for people with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, where pacing is especially important. Next, are the trails well marked? Are there signs that clearly point where to go, especially at forks in the trail? This one is important both for people with low vision and people with cognitive dysfunction. There's other little things like strong smells, loud noises, big crowds, or signs warning of toxic algae. I also like to share information about views and activities like wildlife viewing, for example, so people can decide if a site is worth visiting. While I wish I could fix accessibility issues, for now all I can do is give people the information they need to find the outdoor spaces that are a good fit for them. Because without detailed and accurate site information, you can't really know if a site is going to be accessible for you until you get there. And it can be really frustrating when you find a place you want to visit, you drive 2 hours, and you show up to find the alleged ADA accessible state park doesn't even have a trail. Or the nature trail with quote unquote plenty of benches doesn't even have a single bench for the first half mile. Or the entrance to the wheelchair accessible path at a wildlife refuge was washed out by spring flooding years ago and is no longer accessible. Or there's a single narrow footbridge you didn't know about that prevents you from reaching the wildlife viewing blind. So you either waste your time and trigger a flare-up for nothing, or you risk injuring yourself on a potentially unsafe trail. But also, it just sucks to feel so unwelcome and excluded in outdoor spaces that are built for everybody else. I would like to emphasize that I'm not advocating for paving over all outdoor spaces. I know sometimes people worry that's what I'm saying. And I don't expect 20-mile hiking trails deep in the mountains to have perfectly flat paths and benches every 200 feet. But I do believe our state parks, historic sites, wildlife refuges, and certain areas of national parks should be as accessible to as many people as possible. These are public outdoor spaces that are intended for use by the general public, so disabled people should have equal and equitable access to them. In the future, it would be great to have improved accessibility and a consistent standard in how public outdoor spaces are built and fixed moving forward. The biggest barrier to this is, of course, money and budgeting plus maintenance. But I believe everyone should advocate for outdoor accessibility because accessibility benefits everyone. Any one of us can become disabled or more disabled at any time, and we will all eventually become disabled if we live long enough. But even if we're not disabled ourselves, we all know or care for someone who would benefit from increased accessibility. If not disabled loved ones, then older folks whose mobility and fitness is shifting with age, or families with small children. Plus, non-disabled people enjoy accessible features too. They use benches and signs. They enjoy large bathroom stalls and the convenience of accessible picnic sites. In a state that places so much value on outdoor recreation, I want all Montanans to enjoy our beautiful outdoors, including disabled Montanans. I always like to say it's not necessarily our disabilities keeping us from the outdoors, but the lack of accessibility. Because when those access needs are met, we can enjoy the outdoors like anyone else. When we make outdoor spaces accessible, we welcome everyone to come enjoy them. And when we include not just the bare minimum, like accessible parking and bathrooms, but also include accessible viewing platforms, fishing platforms, campsites, or adaptive equipment rentals, we show disabled people that they belong here too. Okay, now we'll talk about myths and misconceptions. So we've all grown up in a culture that is inherently ableist. It is simply ingrained in our worldview. And that underlying ableism becomes quite obvious when we look at the intersection of disability and the outdoors. So I thought this was a good opportunity to address those biases. We often don't realize that we hold these implicit biases until we take a deeper look and really examine our assumptions. And this is true of any bias like racism, sexism, transphobia. As I go through these examples, please know we have all likely believed these myths and misconceptions at some point, myself included. So just know that we are all in the same ableist boat and in the process of learning and unlearning together. So let's start with the most common belief that people hold, that disability is a tragedy, a fate worse than death, and not a life worth living. This is a pretty extreme view and absurd and simply not true. Obviously, each situation is different, but in general, yes, we have our challenges, and it can be a very difficult life at times, but that doesn't mean our lives can't still be meaningful and fulfilling. We can still have careers, families, relationships, hobbies, goals, and dreams. We adapt, we adjust, and we find new ways of doing things. Life goes on after disability. In response to this disability as tragedy myth, some folks will overcompensate and head into the realm of toxic positivity, where being disabled is always wonderful and a blessing and never bad, which is also extreme and absurd and simply not true. It might sound like that's a nicer view of disability, but what it does is erase the very real challenges that people with disabilities do face, and it shames the disabled people who are struggling and not happy 24/7. That's not a realistic expectation of anybody, including disabled people, nor is it a realistic perception of what disability is. One of my goals in creating Disabled in the Wild was to fight back against that idea that being disabled is not a life worth living, especially after witnessing how apathetic people were of disabled lives during the pandemic. I try to be very cautious not to overcorrect and mistakenly give the impression that being disabled in the outdoors is all unicorns and rainbows. I strive to find a balance in my messaging to others where I share some of the bad along with the good. Because the truth is, while I love exploring the outdoors, it's not without its frustrations. I never want to pretend like this doesn't have bad days or consequences, or that it's somehow magically wonderful at all times. Sometimes my pain level is so high that I feel like I'm going to throw up, or I'm just sitting there on the riverbed, sobbing from the pain, waiting for my next dose of pain support medication. Sometimes I'm thigh deep in the middle of the river when I'm suddenly struck with dizziness and the unmistakable feeling like I'm about to pass out. Sometimes fatigue hits so hard that I can't keep my eyes open and I have to take a break or a nap during the best lighting of the day. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to deal with my limitations, and I don't want to stop and take yet another break, and I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. So I ignore my body and I stubborn my way through until I'm completely miserable and having no fun at all. And the 2 weeks it takes for me to recover from the trip doesn't really seem worth it. That happens too. So I'm not saying it's all sunshine and rainbows, because it's not, or that I never get frustrated with my limits, because I absolutely do, or that my disabilities never get me down, because of course they do. So for the chronically ill and disabled people watching, just please know I'm not over here in some perpetual state of bliss with zero symptoms. And you're not doing something wrong if you're not having a great time every time you go outside. That's perfectly normal. It's not always fun and happy times outdoors. And the truth is that it's not always safe. I have nearly passed out in the middle of the river before, and I've run out of legs before. And there was also one time where I got confused and disoriented when I was rockhounding alone. And the thing about being confused is that you don't know you're confused at the time. And while I had done a lot of the right things that day, like heading back to the truck early and paying very close attention to my surroundings, I still somehow accidentally made a wrong turn, and I didn't realize it until much later. And then my legs stopped working, and I didn't have cell service to call for help. And it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had no choice but to, at times, literally crawl my way out of the situation. When I was able to walk, I kept falling because my knees just kept giving in and buckling. And it took everything I had in me to get out of there before sunset. The outcome could have been a lot worse. Sometimes it doesn't matter how careful you are. Things happen when you have unpredictable symptoms. So please be careful, take extra precautions, and think realistically about both your abilities and disabilities and what is safe for you to do. My message is not about just ignoring the reality of your body, disabilities, or symptoms and doing whatever the heck you want. It's about figuring out what actually works for you and your body, finding that balance in the intersection between your disabilities, strengths, and your interest. So please take good care of yourselves out there. Next, we'll talk about what I call the overcoming myth. When disabled people are recreating in the outdoors or really doing any activity, we're often praised specifically for, quote, overcoming our disabilities. That's always the word used, overcoming. But what does it mean to overcome a disability? When I'm hiking with my forearm crutches in the mountains, am I suddenly no longer disabled? I'm still exploring the outdoors within my abilities and my limitations. My disabled body still dictates how much I can do, how far I can walk, how fast I can walk, how often I take breaks, which activities I do, and what I can do in the days following. So what exactly is it that people think I'm overcoming? It's not possible to magically overcome a disability, but there seems to be this misconception that somehow through sheer willpower and positive thinking, I am pushing through my disabilities and not allowing them to hold me back from the things that I want to do. But that's a misunderstanding of what's happening. I'm still physically disabled, and I'm not doing these things in spite of my disabilities. I'm very much working with them. Just like anybody else, I can't do anything my body isn't capable of doing. I haven't overcome my disabilities, I've simply adapted to them. Similar to the overcoming myth is the Supercrip trope, where a disabled person is perceived or portrayed as having the extraordinary superpower ability to do everything a non-disabled person does and more, and their disability somehow doesn't really affect them. It's a common trope and stereotype in media. It sets up unrealistic expectations for disabled people, and it perpetuates a view that if disabled people just tried hard enough or thought positively enough, they too would overcome their disabilities. This myth also suggests that disabled people are only valid or worthy of praise if they don't let their disability hold them back and have zero limitations. We are only perceived to have value when we distance ourselves from our disabilities and have closer proximity to being non-disabled. One example of Supercrips as it relates to the outdoors is the disabled speakers at outdoors events, who are usually someone who is an extreme sports enthusiast, who had an accident or an injury, and then went back to extreme sports, but now they do it with their disability. Their experience is, of course, valid, and they deserve to tell their stories too. However, I don't want that to be the only message and the only story being told about being disabled in the outdoors. I don't want disabled people to think that the only way they can enjoy the outdoors or be acceptable or have value as a disabled person is to overcome their disability and become a Supercrip. And I don't want non-disabled folks to think that if a disabled person is not achieving the same incredible feat, it's because they just aren't trying hard enough or thinking positively enough. This is why I find it so important to show through my work, not just that I'm exploring the outdoors, but sharing how I'm doing it, how my disabilities affect me, how I accommodate them and adapt, how I continue to work with my body, and that I'm still disabled while I'm doing these things. We do not need to somehow magically do anything and everything a non-disabled person does in the way that a non-disabled person does it. I believe that the disabled person who goes for a stroll through the park to watch the birds is just as valid as the disabled adrenaline seeker. You don't have to defy all odds and do something incredible. It's okay to just live your life. You do not have to be exceptional to be valued. Next, I'm going to talk about inspiration corn. I'll be saying the word corn with a C instead of the real word because this goes up on YouTube later and I don't want it to get flagged, so just FYI. But inspiration corn is something I'm sure everyone has seen online before. It's usually in the form of a story or a meme. For example, a picture of a person with a prosthetic leg working out with text that reads, "What's your excuse?" Or my personal favorite, "The only disability in life is a bad attitude," which makes me laugh every time I see it. Another common example is a news story about a non-disabled student asking a classmate with Down syndrome to prom. Inspiration corn serves to make non-disabled people feel good or inspired by using people with disabilities as objects of inspiration, often at the expense of their humanity. It is by definition objectifying and dehumanizing. The term inspiration corn was coined by disability activist Stella Young. She has a 10-minute TED Talk on YouTube that I highly recommend watching. But she talks about how we've been lied to. We've been told disability is a bad thing, capital B, capital T, bad thing, she says. So disabled people are viewed as exceptional simply for living with a disability, and non-disabled people should feel better about their life because as bad as you have it, well, at least you're not disabled. We tend to see disability through this lens that carries a lot of baggage. Instead of understanding that being disabled simply means you struggle with one or more daily activities, we automatically and without realizing it, smuggle in the notion that disability is the bad thing, a life with no value, and disabled people are sad, miserable, and incapable of doing anything at all. Inspiration corn perpetuates and reinforces those beliefs. One of my concerns from the start of Disabled in the Wilds was that my pictures would be taken and used as inspiration corn. For example, a picture of me with my forearm crutches with text that says, "What's your excuse?" I would never want my pictures and my work to be used as a weapon to shame other people. Just because walking around outdoors is within my ability doesn't mean it's within everyone else's ability. It's simply that my disability doesn't prevent me from doing what I do outdoors. As Stella Young says, we are all using our bodies to their capacity, whether we are disabled or not. While I haven't been turned into inspiration corn yet, I have been told, if you can do this, nobody else has any excuse not to. I've also been told, I'm glad you allow yourself this enjoyment rather than pity. I also randomly get comments like, keep your chin up, stay positive, and everything will be okay. And here's where that baggage I mentioned becomes quite obvious through the language we use and the giant leaps that we make. The only association most people have with mobility aids and disability in general is sadness and tragedy. Therefore, even in a neutral or positive context, people feel the need to offer me comfort or praise me for not wallowing in pity. Along these same lines of pity and praise, there's another type of inspiration corn that happens in real life where disabled people who are simply going about their day are told they are inspirational for doing something ordinary. For example, a wheelchair user shopping for groceries. This may not sound terrible at first, but it is infantilizing to be given excessive praise for doing something you are perfectly capable of doing. It would be no different than telling someone who is wearing eyeglasses that they're inspiring for reading the menu at a restaurant. And this isn't to say you can never be inspired by disabled people or offer praise. It's okay to be impressed and amazed by disabled people when it's appropriate. But there's a difference between being inspired by a wheelchair user shopping for groceries and being inspired by the folks who publish a book or have a successful career in a difficult field or master a hobby or become professional athletes. Celebrate disabled folks for our achievements, talent, and hard work, just like anybody else, and not simply for our disabilities. If you're ever struggling to figure out where that line is, a question that I like to ask myself is, would I be offering praise to a non-disabled person for doing the same thing? What exactly is it that I'm praising? And is it an appropriate and measured amount of praise, or is it infantilizing, objectifying, and dehumanizing? As for me, the people that I want to inspire most is disabled people. I want to inspire them to work with their illness and or disability and find a way to enjoy the outdoors. And if non-disabled folks find me inspiring, what I hope they're inspired by is my adaptability, my determination, my love for the outdoors, my approach to the outdoors, my desire to help others, or my writing. And if I'm praised for something, I want it to be not because of my disabilities and not in spite of my disabilities, but with my disabilities, because they're simply a part of who I am, and that's not a bad thing. To bring all of these myths together, when someone sees a picture like this, where I'm standing with my crutches on top of a tall hill, I don't want them to see some overcoming, conquering, inspirational, all tragedy or sunshine supercrip. Instead, I wish people could see the love and care and acceptance it took to get here. I was very careful with my body. I'm only about half mile from the truck total, and it took me about 2 hours to get there. I walked slowly, and when the pain level got worse, I sat down on my portable stool to eat lunch with my medication and enjoyed the lovely view. I took my time wandering up this hill. I zigzagged so it was easier to swing my right leg forward. I had no expectations that I would reach the top or that I needed to reach the top. I approached it with openness and curiosity. And while the day began with depression, and it took weeks to recover from this trip, this became one of my best days and favorite memories. I stood up there watching that storm swing south on the west side of the valley, then come back up the east side toward me. The torrential downpour finally reached me, and I started heading back to the truck, but along the way I kept finding rocks, and I couldn't help but stop to pick up every single one. And I was fighting against the intense rain and the strong winds, and it was pure chaos, and I loved it. And I did it with my disabilities. My takeaway through sharing these myths and misconceptions is simply balance. We tend to see disability through these extremes, and we don't allow disabled people to simply be human. We're just living our lives. We are not the embodiment of tragedy or inspiration. We have our good days and bad days like anyone else, our difficulties as well as our blessings. We have moments of sadness and joy and the whole spectrum of human emotion in between. We shouldn't have to overcome our disabilities or do something exceptional to be valued, but we also don't want to be infantilized by being praised for doing ordinary things. We want to be seen like anyone else. Our challenges recognized but not pitied, our achievements celebrated but not patronizingly so. One of my goals is to help folks learn a more balanced view of disability, and here are some of the other takeaways that I would like to share with all of you. I want to normalize disabled people existing in the outdoors. Some people are actually surprised to learn that chronically ill and disabled people are interested in outdoor recreation, but losing our abilities doesn't mean we lose our interests. I know when people are new to chronic illness or disability, it can definitely feel like the outdoors are no longer for you, and that's why representation is so important. They say you cannot be what you cannot see, and I want disabled people to know that these spaces are for them too. Everybody belongs outdoors. When non-disabled folks see disabled people in the outdoors, it challenges their assumptions and socially conditioned biases about what it means to be disabled. Ability, like so many other things, is not a binary but a spectrum, and we all have our own limitations and support needs, including non-disabled people, whether it's 2 miles in a day with forearm crutches or 20 miles in a day with trekking poles. A disabled person's limitations and support needs may be more profound and obvious, but it doesn't make our adventures inherently less fulfilling or our time in the outdoors any less valuable. One of my biggest goals is to encourage everyone to find their own way of enjoying the outdoors that works for them. For me, it's wandering BLM land looking for rocks. For you, it might be finding shorter hiking trails with little elevation gain, or going to a fishing access site to sit next to the river. Maybe it's picnicking in a state park or practicing nature photography or birding at a wildlife refuge. Maybe you'd prefer to stay in your car and drive through national parks and forests, or the National Bison Range, for example. Maybe you are not well enough to leave home right now, so you lie in a hammock in your backyard, or stay in bed watching the birds out your window, or even watching nature videos online. There's always some way we can connect with nature, and I want to encourage people to find that way. Check out disabled hikers, access birding, roll mobility, look into local adaptive sports organizations and adaptive equipment rentals in your area. Maybe join your local rock club. I also want to encourage others that life goes on after disability. Unfortunately, because our culture views disability as solely tragedy, when you do become disabled later in life, you already have this preconceived belief that this is the worst thing that could possibly happen, perhaps even worse than death. And that makes adjusting to life with disability 10 times harder. Whereas if we understood early on that disability is a natural variation of the human experience, and while challenging and difficult is not the end of the world, I think it would make it easier to get through the grieving process and into the radical acceptance, adaptation, and creativity phase quicker. We will all at some point need to grieve the loss of our abilities. When we are able to see examples of disabled people living their lives with their disabilities, and especially when we see examples of disabled folks doing something we love to do too, it can be encouraging to know that we can find a way to continue doing the things that we love too. So that's what I hope to provide for both disabled and non-disabled folks: hope, reassurance, and encouragement. Another goal is to raise awareness and educate people on disability and call people in to learn more or become allies and advocates themselves. If you're interested to learn more about disability, I do have some book recommendations. Demystifying Disability is the perfect introduction to disability because it covers a lot of the basics. This is the one I recommend most to everyone. It's a great place to start. Disability Visibility is a collection of essays put together by Alice Wong, and it's written by people with various disabilities and backgrounds addressing various topics and issues. It's a great introduction to the lived experience of disability from different perspectives. Care Work is the one I recommend most for disabled people, especially those who are interested in community and activism. Disability History outlines the history of the concept of disability in the US, who that term has included in different times and how it has changed over time, as well as important legislation and policy. Crip Kinship and Skin, Tooth, and Bone, both of these are also for disabled people who are interested in activism, as well as the culture and art of the disabled community. You can read these summaries and reviews of these books on my blog if you're interested. And I also wanted to mention this book that is next on my reading list by local author Sarah Capdeville. The book is called Aligning the Glacier's Ghost. It intertwines stories of chronic illness with stories and descriptions of Western Montana landscapes. So I thought that might be up everyone's alley. Here are some other great ways that you can show up as an ally. Challenge the assumptions and biases you have about disability as you notice them come up. This is a good practice to get in the habit of doing for really any bias about any marginalized group. Ask yourself where your beliefs and assumptions come from, whether or not they're actually true and how you know, then do some follow-up reading on the subject. Have conversations with your loved ones when the topic comes up and explore it together with curiosity. Share what information you've learned and where they might find the same information. Donate to organizations that help disabled folks like disability rights groups. Check out disabilityrightsmt.org, for example. Disabled Hikers is also a great nonprofit organization, and they have plans to do more guidebooks as well as connecting a nationwide network of disabled outdoors lovers. So if you've learned something today, it'd be great if you wanted to send a few dollars their way. If you're interested, or if you're visiting an outdoor space, leave reviews on Google or Trail apps and include some accessibility information and pictures. Do the same when reviewing indoor spaces too. Advocate for accessibility in the outdoors as well as the indoors. For the chronically ill and disabled folks watching, share your stories, talk about your access needs and your experiences, participate in the conversation, and don't be afraid to get involved. We could always use more people calling attention to these issues. Disabled people are obviously not a monolith. No one person can represent all disabled people. You may have a different experience and viewpoint, and we want to hear your story and your voice too. Next, support legislation and programs that affect disabled people. Protect and expand the ADA, Medicaid and access to healthcare, affordable medication, affordable and accessible housing, equal employment opportunities, education, disability assistance without the forced poverty and marriage inequality. Consider the impact that certain policies may have on disabled people and let your representatives know your concerns. Lastly, protect the immunocompromised and medically vulnerable. Get vaccinated if you're medically able to. Wear a mask if you're going to the hospital or a doctor's office, or maybe even traveling or in a large crowd. If you're sick, stay home. Disabled lives are worth living, and they're also worth protecting. And finally, I would like to leave you all with this. Don't waste a perfectly good heart attack. In his book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, psychologist Francis Weller tells the story of this patient who came to him after having a heart attack, quite eager to return to his life before it happened. Francis Weller tells him, "I'm afraid you are going to waste a perfectly good heart attack." When we are in the grips of illness, he explains, our major focus is on returning to life before illness, but we are not meant to go back. We don't get to choose the things that happen to us or the struggles we endure, but we do get some choice in how we move through them and the lessons we carry with us moving forward. We are meaning-making creatures after all. Being disabled has given me this community and place of belonging, a close relationship with my mortality that has given me the ability to live life with more depth and urgency and meaning. It has given me the knowledge that I am adaptable,
the confidence and deep reassurance that no matter what happens to me in life, I will always find my way. Disability and chronic illness have shaped who I am today. They have become an interwoven part of me that cannot be separated from the rest. As Francis Weller says, there is no going back, nor would I want to. What a shame to throw away the hard-earned lessons I earned and the hard-earned lessons I learned, and for all my suffering to go to waste. I believe there's something really beautiful about taking what we have, our natural talents, our unique experiences, our interests, our traumas, and our privileges, and putting them all together and finding a way of giving it to the world. This is my way of doing just that. I don't want to waste my life wishing it were different. This is the one life I know I'm going to have, and I plan to enjoy it no matter my abilities. And I hope you all do too. Thank you everyone for joining me today. We'll take some more questions here, and I also wanted to provide my contact information in case anyone has any follow-up questions after.